This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israeli troops began the forced evacuation of thousands of Jewish settlers from the Gaza Strip today after a deadline for them to leave expired last night. Unarmed Israeli soldiers broke through burning barricades and marched door to door, ordering people out of their homes in 5 settlements. The operation is the culmination of Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's disengagement plan from the Gaza Strip, which has been occupied by Israel for nearly 4 decades. Troops and police grabbed settlers and pushed them into buses. Scuffles broke out with a large crowd as protesters burned garbage, fought with police officers, threw eggs and water bottles at them. One woman set herself on fire during an anti-pullout protest in the Negev town of Netivot. She was seriously wounded. Settlers in some farming communities were seen burning their greenhouses and homes rather than leave them to the Palestinians. One man took a sledgehammer to the walls of his home. Police said Wednesday morning in the last 24 hours they'd arrested 498 people, of whom 451 were released. Police said one woman was arrested for stabbing and lightly wounding a soldier. Soon after the incident, Sharon beseeched settlers not to attack soldiers, saying, quote, "Don't blame them, don't make it hard on them, don't hurt them, hurt me." Further confrontation looms as hundreds of Israeli troops escorted by bulldozers marched into the Neve Dekalim settlement, a focus of resistance where thousands have defied orders to leave. IDF officials are reportedly hammering out a deal with settlement leaders whereby the settlers would leave by this afternoon. Government eviction notices went into effect Monday, but settlers were given 48 hours to leave or be removed from all 21 settlements in Gaza and 4 of 120 in the West Bank. Many of Gaza's 8,500 settlers packed up trucks ahead of today's deadline to quit Gaza, but the army estimated about half the settler population would remain in defiance. Officials say 2/3 of settler families have accepted compensation deals. Those who refuse to go could lose 1/3 of the money, ranging from $150,000 to $400,000 per family. According to the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, a senior aide to Sharon said all or nearly all of the 21 Gaza Strip settlements could be evacuated within 48 hours, declaring the opposition to the disengagement has failed. The army intends to pull out the last troops from Gaza in early October and turn over the land to the Palestinian Authority. We go now to Gaza to speak with reporter Chris McGreal, a correspondent with the London Guardian. He joins us on the line from the settlement of Neve Dekalim. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Chris.
Good afternoon.
Can you talk about what's happening there right now?
Well, Neve Dekalim, things have moved relatively slowly, partly because there's been quite a large number of young infiltrators, ultra-nationalist kids who come from, many of them from the West Bank or from within Israel proper rather than from the Gaza settlements. They came in to try and disrupt the whole process and are responsible for the burning barricades and the attempts to puncture tires of the security force vehicles and just generally setting up blockades that you've been talking about. That meant that last night some of the settlers who wanted to leave weren't able to do so. So much of this morning has been spent with those settlers willing to go without force being used are now being put onto buses and their furniture being moved into removal vans and then driven out. As you say, there is negotiation going on between the settlement leadership here and the Israeli security forces. We'll see how that works out. The Israeli army is taking the attitude that they want everybody out of the settlement by 7 p.m., which is within 4 hours. And I have to say that the way things are progressing, it's hard to see how that's going to happen. But there are many, many hundreds of police and Israeli soldiers in the settlement right now, and if they were to move in, I think then there would be quite a large number of people who would resist. We're waiting to see what actually happens.
Chris, can you describe who some of the people are who are resisting?
Well, there's two kinds, really, and there's a division between the two groups. The first group is as I mentioned to you, these young ultra-nationalists, what are known as hilltop youth from the West Bank, who generally believe they're not governed by the rule of law. They answer to a higher power, and they've come here to try and disrupt through any means possible, with the exception of violence, they say, disrupt the withdrawal so as to protect what they say is rightfully part of the land of Israel. The other protesters are people who actually live in the settlement, have lived in the settlement for many years. These are families. They're not necessarily very happy about the tactics of the youth. They want to make as a point of principle, they do not want to voluntarily get on the buses. They say they will have to be carried from their homes. They'll have to be lifted onto the buses against their will, but they don't intend, on the whole, to take to the streets and try and use sabotage. Many of those people have already shipped their furniture out in a realistic expectation that their days were numbered, but they simply weren't prepared to walk out of the settlement voluntarily.
We're talking to Chris McGreal in a Gaza Strip settlement. You talk about settlers coming from the West Bank. What will happen to them?
Well, it's not immediately clear. Their legal position is that they are in breach of the law and they could face arrest. Right now, those that are caught are being put on buses and taken away by the police. Whether they will face charges or not, I suspect will depend on whether the government feels that it's politically worth their while to pursue this. I think it will also depend on whether, once all this is over, these young people, who are mostly in their teens, many of them girls actually, whether they have caused sufficient disruption or whether there has been significant violence as to whether it's bother to charge them. So far, there's only been really 2 assaults on the police. There was a very nasty incident yesterday when one of the settler youth threw ammonia into the eyes of a policeman. But that was the most serious incident we've had. And I suspect if it doesn't go very much beyond that, the government will simply decide it's not worth turning these young people into martyrs within the settler movement.
We're talking to Chris McGreal of The Guardian. He is in the Gaza Strip. Yesterday we talked to Amira Haas, the Israeli reporter from Haaretz. She said that there is, of course, a good deal of focus right now on 8,000 settlers, but what is not being talked as much about is the fact that there are 400,000 settlers who will remain in the West Bank.
Well, indeed, and in fact, one of the great debates about Ariel Sharon's true intent here is whether pulling out of Gaza, removing a relatively small number, as you say, of 8,000, is really a means of protecting the 400,000 who live in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. It's interesting that there are twin messages that come out from the government and from Sharon. There's a message to the outside world, which is firmly this is not the case. When Sharon's Deputy Prime Minister Ehud Olmert held a press conference last week with the foreign press, he said categorically there is no attempt to use